Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for joining the very first Hope Hub live stream. I am really grateful that Mark Carpenter is going to be my guinea pig today. Mark is a master storyteller, and he's written an incredible book that helps you turn your experiences into stories that teach, lead, and inspire. I would like to start just by getting to know you and what is your story and how did you get on this journey to becoming a master storyteller?
Thank you, Jan. I appreciate that. I'm honored to be your first guest
Yes,
on Hope Hub. I'm happy to be your guinea pig. You can experiment all over on me, and that's just fine because I
we're
love
gonna be
talking
great. We're
about
gonna be great.
and I love talking about this topic. Storytelling, and maybe I'm giving away the ending at the beginning, but storytelling is how we connect as a species. And it's something that in my life has come very naturally for me. Quick story on the background of the book. I've been facilitating learning for 2 decades, and prior to that, worked in marketing communications and public relations. And stories were just a very natural part of my teaching and communicating journey. Well, I'd helped a friend write a book. I kind of ghost wrote the book for him, and I was talking to my wife, and this was 10 years ago, about how I felt like I needed to write my book, but I didn't know what it was on. And she said, "Oh, you have to write a book about how you just take everyday life experiences and turn them into teaching moments." And my first reaction was, "Well, there's no book in that." But then the more I started talking to people about it, the more they said to me, "Oh, I would love to see that. I would love to get some more structure around what I do to tell stories." And as I started doing the research with my friend Daryl Harmon, who co-authored the book with me, we found that there's some pretty strong research about why storytelling is so important and how it connects us as a species and how it helps people actually remember information better and relate to it better in a way that's meaningful to them. And so that's where I got kind of into this storytelling journey. And then we have a workshop that goes along with the book as well to teach people those skills, because it is a skill to learn how to tell stories in a way that's impactful.
Well, we will get to the more specific widow angle of telling stories because, unfortunately, part of our lives, my life and our lives as widows, is I'm so sorry about what happened. What happened? And so there's, that question for many people is dread. That experience that they feel is dread. There is a variety of people who like myself, have no problem telling you every single detail because I feel like it helps people. And then there are those people who are like horrified to even share anything. But before we get in there, were you a storyteller as a child? Was that part of your personality? Because I know I'm an only child and my parents loved to put me in front of everybody and just talk and talk and talk. And so it's something that's always been in my blood.
Well, I'm the quintessential middle child, and so I was the one that was always vying for attention. And
Ah,
so
yes.
vying for attention was, I'd tell jokes and I'd love to tell stories. I think though the real stem of my storytelling comes from the fact that my mother was a reading teacher.
Okay.
And so we had to read all the time. I put "had to" in air quotes because I actually loved reading. I was the kid who took the flashlight to bed and read under my covers at night. And so I think that's part of my storytelling too, is I've read a lot of stories. And so I know what makes a good story kind of
Mhm.
intuitively. And then, of course, we've done the research to say there's a pattern to this that helps make it so. But then I've just always been a storyteller. I believe that in my work in public relations and marketing communications, where I'm telling an organization's story, I want to tell the story. I don't want to just give the facts and figures. I want to make it engaging for people to understand who we are and how we connect with you. And then as I transitioned into doing training and facilitation and public speaking, that's a huge part of those roles, to be able to explain new concepts in a clear way and help people relate them to their lives. And so I just see storytelling as a way that we connect as human beings.
Right. And the reason why I asked about, your kind of childhood entry into this is because the stories that we tell as widows are very personal. They are not
Yeah.
the story of a company or a brand or messaging that's trying to get out there. I also worked in PR for about 20 years, and so I understand that part of storytelling. But for us, it is incredible. I mean, it is as personal as you can possibly get. And so, I'd be interested in hearing your experience and maybe what the research is behind sharing, those deeply personal stories.
Yeah, we all have our own life experiences, and they're all very individual experiences. And yet they all have overlapping and connecting points. And it's those points of overlap and connection that will bind us as people and to help us feel not so alone. As, as you just talked about, you worked in public relations and I worked in public relations. Well, we have this overlapping connection that automatically we go, oh, this is one of my tribe.
Hmm.
This is a person I can relate to. We have some shared experiences, even though they aren't directly shared experiences. And so it helps us to relate to one another and also to feel not so alone. I think that comes both on the hearing the story and the telling the story side. When I tell someone a story, a personal story, and they go, oh, yes, I can relate to that emotion. Maybe not the exact experience, but I can relate to that emotion of it. Then we get more connected with that person that we're telling the story to as well. There's some interesting research that's done by Dr. Paul Zak at Claremont Graduate College, and he talks about the how the chemistry in our brain changes when we're telling and hearing good stories. That when you find a connecting point, when you hear a story about an experience or even an emotion that's relatable, we get an increase in oxytocin in our brains. And oxytocin is a trust hormone.
Hmm.
And so I trust you more and I feel more connected to you because of the chemistry that's happening between us that comes from those relatable stories.
Well, thank you for validating everything that I am putting my entire life into right now, and the purpose of creating what I'm creating through Hope Hub and through my overarching company, it's Lifey, is that, I use the word community a lot, and I often describe it as people being with others who get it. And that seems very simple, but it's very understandable to people because of what you just said. When you are telling a story and someone else is like, oh, I get that, or I've been through that. And, it doesn't have to be that exact story, but in my case, in this community that is all widows, it is, yes, no, the stories of, how their spouse died or when or where, that might differ. But the fact that we are all living without our loved one and our partner, that is very much the same. And so, just hearing that really, really validates the importance of this community.
Yeah, and I want to just take a moment to honor what you're doing too, because this is how Jen and I connected. Actually, we were on a kind of a networking call together, and I heard
Mhm.
about what she's doing, and I thought this is such important work because we live in a world today that, despite all of our ability to connect, we have a crisis of loneliness.
Mhm.
People feel more disconnected today than they ever have before. And you are creating a community, and I love that word community, where people can connect. I also have some personal connection on this. I told this to Jen earlier. I have a sister who lost her husband 9 years ago to a brain tumor. And so this is very real to me and in my family, not to me personally, but to very close family connections for me. That I know that sense of community is really important. Now, fortunately for her, she already had a strong community that she kept tapping into, and she was willing to do that. But I know there's a lot of others who feel really disconnected during this time, during these for these events. And I just appreciate that you are stepping out there and acknowledging that and saying, let's make the connection that's going to make this easier for all of us.
Absolutely. And I too feel very lucky. I had a really strong community. Part of my story is that of recovery from addiction, and so I have a very strong community in that world, in that part of my life. But I still found that I needed a separate community that had been through what I had been through. And I feel so lucky over the last year, I've been able to run support groups and widow retreats. And I have found that community. People say to me all the time, your husband dies and you start a business. What's wrong with you? And I said, I needed it too. And I found that other people did too. And so, why not keep going with it? And on that note, I'm going to switch over a little bit to what I positioned before as the dreaded question that every widow gets because people are nosy. And people, I mean, if you think about the world of reality TV and Facebook and all of these kind of voyeuristic platforms where people want to know the inside scoop of your life, it's sometimes entertaining and sometimes a little bit disgusting. But the same thing happens when you tell somebody or somebody hears that you have lost your spouse. They say, I'm really sorry for your loss. What happened?
Yeah.
And so would love your advice kind of on the different types of personalities and how to craft that story for someone who is more of an extrovert like myself, but more importantly for someone who hears that and goes and has no idea what to say. Are there components that can be, or are there teachings that can be helpful for that person?
Yeah. And so I want to start with, you don't have to share anything that you don't feel comfortable sharing.
100%.
There is no law out there in the world that says you have to share this. Well, one of the things in talking to my sister that she said is, watch out for this advice that seems like one size fits all.
Mm,
You
yes.
have to do it this way. You have to get rid of all your spouse's clothes. You can't make any important decisions within the first year. She said, there were huge important decisions I had to make within my first
Mhm.
year. So that's terrible advice. So don't feel like you have to share every detail of the story. When I teach storytelling, I remind people the telling of the story for the purpose to teach, lead, and inspire is not so much about you, it's about the other person. And so when somebody asks that question, tell me what happened. You need to make a decision, a little bit of a judgment there to say, why are they asking this question?
Mm,
Are they asking this question for just a broad informational reason? Or do they really want some details in what my learning points were from that? Because if it's the first one, if somebody says, oh, I'm really sorry, what happened? If I was my sister, I might say, yeah, my husband had a brain tumor and died about 9 months after the diagnosis. And that might be all I say. That might be all the person is looking for. But if they say, how are you able to deal with that? Well, now that's a different story. Now I know that they need to learn something about what I learned in that process. And so, how much you tell really depends on what the point is in your telling.
mhm.
What point am I trying to make? Am I just trying to give people a little information? And if you don't know, I would start with the very general piece of information. My husband had a heart attack, or my husband had this disease and died, or there was an accident, whatever it happens to be, and just give that very small piece of information. If they want something more, they'll probably ask for something more. And if they ask for something more and you're not sure why they're asking, it's always fair to say, well, tell me why you're asking.
Mhm.
What would you really like to know from my experience? And then you can start editing your entire story from that. You don't need to tell your entire story to the whole world if that's not what you're comfortable with. The other side of that is watch. If you are somebody that's really comfortable telling that story, watch the reaction of the other person,
Mhm.
because you may get halfway through the story and you see them backing up, if not physically, emotionally, saying, oh, this is more than I really wanted here. And so you got to be careful on, you don't need to overshare as well. Okay. So look at intent. What is your purpose in telling that story? And what does that other person need? And that'll help edit you down and let you feel comfortable. And I don't have to tell every detail of this story.
Absolutely. I appreciate that so much. As an oversharer, I appreciate that advice too, of really watching people's reaction. But what I think is one of the most important things that you just shared is that you don't owe anybody anything.
Exactly.
I think it's just commonplace. It's like the I'm so sorry is something that most people just say. In fact, it's something that I refuse to ever say because of the situation that I'm in and because I know better. But that's just, and it's okay. It's just acceptable. It's part of our culture. And to your point, that what happened also becomes part of that, like just what people say. And they might not even really care. I mean, I hate to say it that way, but it's just, and so the ability for the widow to be able to give the smallest bit of information without feeling guilty or obligated to share more is a really great point. I mean, it
Yeah.
might be just what the person wants to hear is that little piece.
Yeah. My sister had an experience where she was in a group setting and I can't remember her telling me exactly how it came up, but it came out that she was a widow. And there was a person sitting 2 rows in front of her whose head flipped around really quick and looked back at her. And she's like, oh, that was kind of an interesting reaction. Well, after the meeting, that person made a beeline toward her and said, I had no idea that you were a widow. Oh, I'm so sorry. What happened? And she gave the very brief information.
Hmm.
And this lady said to her, I'm a widow too. I see you as so high functioning. Can you teach me how to be a better widow? Well, then my sister could share some experience and just have a conversation. She could say, well, tell me what happened with your husband and tell me what you're struggling with. Well, here's some experiences that I've had that can relate to what you're going through. But you kind of have to have a conversation and not just, well, let me now stand on my platform and tell you my entire story because I can. There needs to be a reason for that.
That that literally brings tears to my eyes because that happens it happens all the time. Where you give that small amount of information and somebody, wants to immediately learn from you. And it's why I say to people, everybody has their own version or their own comfort with how they share it. But even if that little bit can help somebody else, or, that high functioning widow, like that is a perfect way of phrasing what people say to me all the time. It doesn't mean that I don't, cry in my room or experience grief in deep ways, because obviously I do. But if I have the opportunity, and what also happens a lot, and I'm really, loving this, is that somebody will say, what do I do? How do I get in touch? Do you have a financial advisor that you could recommend or an estate attorney? And all of a sudden, it turns from that emotional story to the practical side of things, and that sharing of information is really cool. Um,
Yeah. Yeah. And it's easy to feel like you're helping in that way. And when you feel like you're helping other people, it kind of helps you through that as well. Another point that my sister made, and you've probably experienced this too, Jen, as somebody that's pretty high functioning, she says she sometimes feels a little judged
mm,
for not openly grieving in front of people.
mm,
Now, if you're an open griever, that's probably fine. But you also have to recognize that people take grief in different ways or handle their grief in different ways. And so be okay with that as well. That we're all in a similar experience, but it's a different experience for each person individually.
absolutely. Well, thank you for sharing that and for really giving people permission. I think that's really what I've heard the most, to share as little or as much as they want and to really understand the reasoning for sharing that. Um, I'll end by asking, we can give a short version of this, but if you think of all of the personal stories you have heard in your career, is there one that really stands out that really moved you?
There are so many.
I'm sure. And
There,
so,
there are seriously so many stories and experiences that will go that direction. I'm trying to think of the one that would relate most to this audience, and it it may even be the story that I just told about my sister.
yeah.
Well, okay, I'll tell you this one. This is another one about my sister, and it relates to the sensitivity that we all should have. About 3 months after her husband passed, she got a collection notice from a bill for the ambulance that took her husband to the hospital the night before he died. And it was one of those things that had just slipped through the cracks. She had the funds, she was willing to pay it. It had just somehow slipped through the cracks. So she called the number on the notice and got a highly accented voice on the other end of the line. It's a call center, likely in an international market, and explained, I'm calling about a collection notice. They asked for the number on the notice, and she read it, and he said, I need to talk to Thomas. And she said, well, that's my husband, but he's passed away. He said, well, his name is on this notice. He's the one that I need to talk to. And she said, okay, I need to make this really clear. The bill here is for when my husband went to the hospital in an ambulance and he died the next day. So he's no longer with us. I'm his widow, and I would like to pay this bill. And he said, I can't move forward on this until I talk to Thomas. Now think about this sensitivity level there, right? It's
I'm secretly laughing because I think every widow has that story, whether it's Verizon or their energy company or it
yeah.
is unbelievable.
So I think about this in terms of business policies.
Yeah.
It's like, can you make your policies so they're a little more sensitive to people? Now, the end of this story is my sister, who's very level headed, finally said, could I speak with your supervisor? She gets the supervisor on the phone thinking it's a language barrier and the supervisor will be able to take care of this. She got the exact same thing from the supervisor.
Mhm.
And so finally she said to him, so you're telling me that you will not allow me to pay this bill until you talk to my dead husband? And he said, yes, we need to talk to Thomas on this matter. And she said, okay. And she hung up. And she got two more collection notices that she ignored.
Mhm.
And she never heard from him again. And she never had to pay the bill.
Yeah. I mean, yes,
Eh,
a
but my
that happens.
but my biggest takeaway from that is, can we as organizations be a little better at how we deal with sensitive situations? Can we train our people better to be humans, not just follow the policy? And so that's a story I tell a lot from the perspective of the other side, to say, think about your business practices,
Right.
and policies are important, but can they be flexible to deal with people?
Well, Mark, this is a whole other conversation for another time because, when I started It's Lifey, one of the things I was thinking of doing is to teach corporations how to deal with people who are grieving because it is a really big problem in corporate America, from the fact that you might get 3 days of bereavement, which is just, disgusting, to just the communication that happens not only between leadership and that person, but between colleagues. And so, anyway, we will table that for another day.
As I
I
say,
want
put me
to,
on the agenda for
yeah.
that conversation. I have another book that I've written that's called Lead Like a Person, Not Like a Position.
Oh,
And
yes, I love it.
and
I
that's
love
where
it.
that
I love
ties
it.
in for
Yeah,
me
but
as well.
for this time though, I hope that anybody who's listening can feel a little bit of relief knowing that the question's going to come. It's just part of our vernacular as human beings. And so how we answer it really can depend on what Mark said of why is that person asking and what information are they really trying to get? And so I encourage anybody who's listening to this to think about those things. Mark's information is going to be in the resource center if you're interested in learning more about what he does or becoming a better storyteller yourself. I have found that to be incredibly healing, is learning how to tell my story, and that might be something you're interested in as well. So thank you so much, Mark. You were a great
Jen,
guinea pig.
thank you so much for having me on, and I
It's
wish you the
been,
best and all the best and all the caring to your community as well. Because I know it is a difficult situation you're going through, and just know that there are other people out there who care and who support you and who love you.
thank you so much.